Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a case that it just moved with such tragic speed. And it was ultimately defined by the incredible power and really the irony of digital forensics.
We're talking about the disappearance and murder of 13-year-old Madeline Soto in Florida.
Exactly. And, this is obviously very sensitive material, so we want to be clear that we're sticking strictly to the documented facts here.
Right. Our mission is to really understand that investigative process. We want to track the key discoveries, both legal and technical, that took this from a missing person report in February 2024 to a final sentence in July 2025.
So the two central figures here are Madeline Soto, the victim, and Stephen Michael Stearns. He was her mother's boyfriend.
And the primary suspect from very early on.
He was, and when you review the sources, you just see immediately that this whole investigation was a race against time, and almost every single piece of evidence hinged on digital footprints.
It's so true. And the timeline, it just starts hard and fast. Monday, February 26, 2024. That's the last day Madeline was seen. She was reported missing after staff at her middle school confirmed she never showed up that morning.
And an absence like that immediately puts the focus on the adults in her life. So what does that initial phase tell us about what Stearns was doing on that really critical first day?
The initial phase is, well, it's really marked by two highly suspicious actions he takes, almost at the same time. One's physical, the other is digital.
Okay, so let's start with the physical.
Right, so video surveillance, it captures Stearns driving around on February 26th, and at one point he's very clearly filmed discarding a whole bunch of material into a dumpster.
That dumpster dive, as investigators call it, it's usually a crucial first step when a suspect has a window of time to try and get rid of things.
It is.
What did they find in there?
They found Madeline's backpack and, even more critically, her school-issued laptop. And retrieving those items, it immediately served two purposes for the police. First, it confirmed that he was almost certainly involved in her disappearance, right, taking steps to conceal where she was.
Okay.
And second, that laptop's metadata, the timestamps, the logs, that could help them build a more precise timeline of her final hours, even before they got into any phones.
So we have the physical evidence removal on the 26th. And there was a digital side to this, too.
Yes, happening in the same time. On that same day, Stearns does a factory reset on his phone.
A factory reset.
He later claimed it was an accident.
Which, given the circumstances, is pretty hard to believe.
It's a massive, massive red flag. A factory reset is, for anyone listening, it's an attempt to wipe the slate clean. It targets the data that's stored right there on the phone messages, recent photos, browser history, the immediate trail.
So if he had been successful, that would have been a huge setback.
A huge handicap for the investigation's initial trajectory, absolutely.
But they don't stop. So on February 27th, the Orange County Sheriff's Office asks for public help. And by the 28th, a formal search is going.
Yeah.
And that day, the 28th, that's when a pivotal moment happens, right?
A huge moment. That's when Stearns makes what turns out to be a critical legal mistake. He gives police consent to search his phone.
He just consents to it.
He does. And you have to remember, at this stage, Madeline was still officially a missing person. Suspicions were incredibly high, but that was her status. His consent gave them the opening they needed.
It let them bypass the immediate need for a warrant.
Exactly. And once they started digging into the device he thought he had wiped clean, the entire case it exploded.
And this where the technical failure of his cover-up just becomes the whole story. So
Yeah.
He wipes the phone on the 26th, consents to the search on the 28th. What did they find on February 29th? And more importantly, how did they find it?
Well, what's so fascinating here is that the factory reset only dealt with part of his digital footprint. He may have thought he erased everything that was stored locally on the device itself. But what he completely failed to account for was the cloud sync.
The automatic backup.
Exactly. Many modern phones, they automatically back up your media, your files, to services like Google Drive.
Wait, so let me get this straight. Even though he wiped the phone, the synchronization with his cloud storage was still active. So it's basically a backup key to everything he tried to destroy.
That's it. It must have been a devastating realization for his defense. The investigation pivoted so fast from that wiped phone to his Google Drive and other cloud accounts.
And what did they find there?
It was overwhelming. Pictures and videos of Stearns molesting Madeline.
Oh, wow.
And the documentation was just horrific. It dated all the way back to when she was only 8 years old. So this wasn't just evidence of a recent crime. It confirmed years of systemic abuse.
The technical implication there is just enormous. For investigators and for you, the learner, it shows that even when a suspect tries to erase a device, the cloud can act as this enduring, almost permanent ledger.
Absolutely. The discovery of what would become the 60 sets crime charges was entirely dependent on investigators knowing how to pivot from the local device to that cloud environment.
And that discovery, it must have just changed everything.
It didn't just provide a motive, it transformed the scale of the potential charges immediately. And then, so tragically, on March 1st, just 2 days after that digital breakthrough, Madeline's body was found in a wooded area.
At which point it becomes a homicide investigation.
Yes, the Kissimmee Police Department took over, and medical findings released later confirmed she died of strangulation.
So despite this mountain of evidence, the laptop, the cloud data, the defense still mounted a really aggressive legal challenge, didn't they? Based entirely on how that digital evidence was acquired.
It's a classic Fourth Amendment battle. Stearns' lawyers requested that the key phone content, all that visual evidence, be thrown out.
On that grounds.
They argued that while Stearns gave consent on the 28th, the sheer scope of what they found later required a formal search warrant.
So they were arguing his consent wasn't a blank check.
Essentially, yes. They were saying either his consent wasn't voluntary or that the search went way beyond what he authorized. And because they didn't get a warrant before pulling down the abuse materials, it violated his rights.
That's a crucial distinction. They were trying to call it fruit of the poisonous tree.
Precisely. Trying to get the most damning evidence thrown out on a technicality. But regardless of that legal fight, the case moved forward. He was indicted by a grand jury in April 2024. Murder, sexual battery, the whole list. The system was now fully engaged. With the indictment locked in, the focus shifted to the penalty. And in June 2024, the Ninth Judicial Circuit Attorney's Office, they made a really significant decision.
They announced they would seek the death penalty.
They did.
Which is often a strategic move in cases this severe. It puts a ton of pressure on the defense to negotiate. What was their counter-argument?
Well, their strategy was sort of twofold. First, they were still trying to block that core evidence like we discussed. Yeah. And second, they fought the death penalty itself by arguing it constituted cruel and unusual punishment, citing the 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments. They were using every constitutional tool they had to try and complicate the path to an execution.
And this push and pull, the prosecution aiming for the ultimate sentence, the defense fighting the penalty, and the evidence, that's what finally leads to the plea deal.
It is. That conclusion came on July 21st, 2025.
What were the terms?
The plea deal was the final strategic compromise. On that day, Stearns changed his plea. He pleaded no contest to the murder charge.
So he accepts the conviction without formally admitting guilt on that one.
Right. But, and this is critical, he pleaded guilty on all 60 of the sex crime charges, the ones that came directly from that Google Drive evidence.
So that's the trade-off. He admits to the full extent of the digital sex crimes, which were just undeniable, and in exchange, he avoids the death penalty.
That is correct. He saved his own life, but by pleading guilty to those 60 charges, he locked in a sentence with no room to appeal that evidence. It was the definitive end to the road to trial.
And what was the final sentence that afternoon?
Stearns was sentenced to 21 concurrent life sentences in state prison, and the condition was absolute. No possibility of parole. The certainty from that plea deal ensures that, based on evidence he tried and failed to destroy, he will never be a free man again.
If we synthesize this whole deep dive, the most compelling takeaway for me is the forensic failure of the suspect. He tries a factory reset to erase local evidence, then makes it worse by consenting to a search.
Yeah.
But the ultimate irony is that his own sync settings gave the prosecution everything they needed.
This case is a perfect illustration for you, the learner, of how persistent digital footprints really are. The key evidence didn't exist on the device he wiped, but on the remote cloud storage it was linked to.
And that discovery of the 60 sex crimes established the timeline, the motive, and the overwhelming guilt that just drove the case to its conclusion.
It did. And it also led to that fascinating legal fight that was only resolved by the plea deal itself. That tension between consent and warrants, it's still a massive issue in digital investigations.
Which brings up a really important question for you to mull over. So, Stephen Stearns gave consent for police to search his phone on February 28th. That consent led them to all the evidence on his Google Drive.
Mm-hmm.
His defense later tried to nullify that evidence, arguing that this deep dive into his cloud storage, which uncovered years of abuse, required a formal warrant, regardless of that initial consent.
Right.
So when does a suspect's voluntary consent in a homicide investigation stop being valid? At what point must law enforcement pivot and get a formal warrant to keep searching digital spaces they only got access to because of that initial consent.
It highlights that constant tension, doesn't it? Protecting constitutional rights versus the immediate urgent needs of justice in these digital environments.
A critical line for the courts to find, and one that cases just like this will inevitably push them to clarify. Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive.